Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Board of Trade podcast. As always, I'm Jaipaul.
I'm Vijay.
And we're back once again to talk about all things happening in the world and what we think they mean for Brampton.
That's right, yeah.
So we've got a couple topics that we want to talk about today.
Yeah.
As usual, we'll take the framework of maybe going local and then sort of working our way up through tiers of government.
Yeah, let's do it.
So we want to do a little bit of a conversation around some bylaws that have been passed in Mississauga recently and what we think that might mean here in Brampton.
Mm-hmm.
We want to have a quick conversation regarding the turnaround on Billy Bishop and the decision at the airport. That's kind of both a provincial and a federal conversation.
Yeah.
And then a more federal one, announcements around funding for housing.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
Perfect. Well, what I wanted to start off with is I don't know how much you've been following. You and I have not talked about this.
Yeah, I'm very interested in this topic.
But I've been quite curious to see the recent decision that was made at Mississauga Council to pass an interim bylaw as it pertains to the development of data centers.
Yeah.
And in particular, their response to a project that was proposed by Prologis that had proceeded in all the normal channels as part of the development applications and so forth, and then kind of hit, it seems, a point where there was some technical review and questions that began to arise. And that seemed to flag a bunch of attention, both at the council level, but more so at the community level, concerns around data centers as a form of development within the community.
Yeah.
And the resistance to the data center really came from two or three key areas. One of which was there wasn't really a framework in place that really conceives what is appropriate in terms of the requirements of a data center, what it should look like, where it should look like. This was a two-story development in the Argentia area, so a fairly dense industrial area in Mississauga already.
Yeah.
There are concerns around the impact to residents around, whether it be in the form of sound, whether that be in the form of like noise pollution. But there's been a lot of early conjecture, let's call it that. I don't know if anything's been substantiated, that there might be some long-term health impacts to living near data centers. This is primarily coming out of some experiences people have had in the US. And then a big piece of it has been around power and electricity. And does the infrastructure, does the grid in Mississauga, is it sufficient to meet the needs of that particular data center, let alone data centers in general? So those sort of seem to be the big three pieces. And the decision was made to put a moratorium on the development of data centers for up to a year, to study and come up with a plan for their appropriate development within the city.
Yeah.
We haven't seen yet the final wording on what that looks like, but I just thought it was an interesting topic in general. As an organization that tries to straddle the line between being a real responsible steward for our community, but also being an effective voice on behalf of businesses, it's not often those two things come into conflict. We often position it as you need to have success in both areas for a successful Brampton. I think it really drives the advocacy work that you and I try to do here at the Board of Trade on both behalf of the businesses and the community. But every now and then, and we've seen it here in Brampton with a few other issues around waste incineration has been a high profile one here as well.
Yes.
That every now and then there is a piece where it seems what the business community wants and what the community wants may not sync up right away.
No, for sure.
And there's got to be some conversation about how to proceed. So I found this fascinating.
Yeah.
There hasn't yet been a lot of movement in Brampton on this issue that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
A few other communities that have, we do have data centers. We have a big data center here in Brampton. And full disclosure, they are a member of the Board of Trade. But some other communities like Burlington, which also have development, data center projects in the development, in the application process, the boards of trade there have really rallied around the data center. I've been a loud voice saying, we need these data centers. They are critical infrastructure for the growth of our business community. So in Mississauga, it sounds like the voice of the residents came through. In Burlington, it seems like the voice of the business community is being heard because there's been no motion passed in Burlington to slow down the development of their data center. Inevitably, places like Brampton will have more opportunities to, develop data centers. We have land. We are a right place for this type of development. And I'm just curious what you think about this type of tension and what kind of approach we should be taking as a community.
Yeah, I have a few questions, and shame on me, I haven't really been following the Mississauga situation in depth, so I have a few questions about that.
And it's all quite emerging. This is all happening in real time right now.
So as you noted, we do have data centers in Brampton. We have data centers across the country already. I know that there's a lot of citizen-led opposition, let's say, to hyperscale data centers, like we're seeing in Edmonton, as an example. And I think those are two separate conversations. I think the data centers we have today, they're operating at a few megawatts, maybe tens of megawatts. hyperscale data centers, from my understanding, they're operating on hundreds,
That's correct.
if not gigawatts,
Yeah.
right? And in the case of Edmonton, that Meta data center will produce the equivalent energy of the entire city of Edmonton.
Mm.
And not only that, even if they're
Yeah.
closed loop systems, there's there's concerns about water and the use of fresh
and many of them
water.
have like closed systems as it pertains to water, recovery.
But even in those systems, I mean, the amount of energy that's required for the fans to cool it down is tremendous. So there are real concerns, and also fresh water. Canada is it has the most fresh water in the world, and there's a big demand in the AI space for that. So in the case of Mississauga, like what is the scale of this data center?
It doesn't seem to be large. Now, I don't know the entire footprint. I know it's a 2-story building that they're looking to do. I understand it's in the less than 500,000 square feet. It's not a massive development based, I mean, relative to what we've seen in places like Brampton, with respect to some of our warehousing and stuff like that. Like, we've been in much larger facilities than I understand that this facility is going to be.
Okay.
I think a big part of it is that it's in an established part of the community where there are, this is my guess here, is because we've seen similar issues in Brampton. When we have a large employer or a large electricity user going into a place where there are already a number of businesses who rely on electricity, it just strains the grid beyond its capacity.
Yes.
So consequently, there just isn't enough electricity, not for the new business, but for all the businesses surrounding it. We've got a few high-profile businesses who've struggled for that specific reason. When they built, they were great, but other businesses being around them put a strain on the grid. I suspect some of the resistance, to this particular data center because of its electricity usage is because it's going into a place that is a mature business district within Mississauga, and therefore would have impact. There's a lot of automotive parts manufacturing, for instance, in there.
Interesting.
There's at least 2 different magnet facilities I know of in that same general area. I imagine they are large electricity users, and I would have a suspicion that they would be concerned about someone coming in and drawing a lot of power.
Okay, that's an interesting angle.
But that's a guess. That's pure conjecture by me.
What's your take on that then in that case? Because I think what we're seeing here is not just community versus business. We're seeing business versus business in some cases, right? They're competing for the organizations in that area are competing for the same energy that Prologis would presumably be requiring, and so. We have our own energy challenges here in Brampton as well, and without a data center or an additional data center, we see some companies making the decision or considering going to other areas because of the data constraint or the energy constraint.
Electricity constraint. Yeah. That's right.
So what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, so I have 2 concerns really, and neither one of them is insurmountable.
Yeah.
It's more about, and I think this is why this is an interesting topic to me on behalf of the Board of Trade, because this is a conversation, therefore, around consensus, building up a point of view and making some recommendations for what we think is good development. And again, we need to have a little more interaction with our colleagues at the city, who I did reach out to, but I wasn't able to connect with in advance of us recording this podcast. Just to understand where the city is on some of these initiatives as well. Yeah. I've not heard a whiff of resistance within Brampton, but I also don't know what's going on, in the back rooms of City Hall, and maybe there are concerns that we're not aware of yet. All that said, I think, this notion that businesses are competing for a limited set of resources is a very real thing. Yeah. And I think we think of it on occasion in the context of people and talent. Yeah. That 2 different employers may need the same limited group of skill set, and that drives up a need in the market. And sometimes that can be really good. It means salaries can go up. It means universities and colleges have the opportunity to create training programs. But in this case, the resource is a little more limited, and it's a little harder to turn around. We just can't import skilled talent, import electricity the way we can import skilled talent. So in this case, I think a much more thoughtful approach is required to say, where do we want to put these data centers so that do we have the grid capacity to support them? Yeah. And B, if so, where do we best position them where they won't be have a negative impact on existing industry, particularly if there are other big data requirements, electricity requirements from those surrounding businesses. So I think there's got to be some thoughtfulness about where they go. I think this requires a lot of working with the utilities to ensure that that those electricity needs are met. Because a big part of this, and I don't know how much it's come up in the Mississauga conversation, but it's come up when we talked about electricity use among some of our manufacturing companies. There's 2 conversations there. One is, can we meet the electricity needs of that company? The answer usually is yes, because it's just a conversation around cost and how quickly it can be built out. But that leads to the second conversation, which is, and who pays for that?
Yes.
Is it reasonable to ask Electra to pay for that?
Yeah.
Who's the electricity
Yes.
utility provider?
Yeah.
Is it the responsibility of the business? Is it the responsibility of the municipality? I don't know, and I think that's where I'm going to guess is there's some murkiness there.
I mean, this is sort of like, presumably what development charges could and should be used for.
And this is why I think a structure that's unique to a data center merits some conversation, because the DC framework, if it doesn't contemplate an energy user at that scale, then I think it's worth going back and saying, okay, in a specific type of use, maybe the focus of the percentage of the DC, the cost of the DC, or some other mechanism needs to be there, because an infrastructure needs to be built around this business that goes beyond just the usual sewage, roads, and power needs that would be in a conventional manufacturing business.
And this is also, I think, a potential advocacy item as well to get some capital funding from a federal government, let's say, to modernize our grids, because this is an issue that's been at least on our docket for the last couple of years. The idea that our grid is not in a position to accommodate the explosion in demand that we will be seeing with electric vehicles and so on and so forth. And we have to have some real tough conversations about an increase in rates, in particular electricity rates, that's already a significant cost for a lot of businesses already. What do you think about the bylaw decision in Mississauga? So this is the 1-year moratorium on.
This is my understanding now. This was a motion passed by council. They have not come back with the actual writing of the bylaw itself. So to what detail it's going to be explored, what prerequisites need to be satisfied in order for the bylaw to be met are still unclear. But in the broad sense, it's a 1-year pause on the development of data centers in Mississauga while they study the best approach. And again, based on my read and of the minutes from that council meeting and just talking to people who were there, it really seems that it's focused around these 2 or 3 key issues. The concerns around citizenry, around residents, around living near a data center, the potential for the power being insufficient to meet the requirements, or the impact of its draw on power. And fundamentally, they just don't have a framework to contemplate, what a responsible development of a data center looks like, let alone, to what you commented on. So therefore, what are the DCs or other cost recovery mechanisms that need to be in place to support the infrastructure that's unique to that type of business?
What I find interesting about this is that a lot of the fervor around this topic is kind of being imported from the general AI anxiety that people are feeling. And we hear with these hyperscale AI data centers, these LLM data centers, there is a tremendous drain on resources and all these things. This Mississauga case feels like a different issue, which is around how we plan for big energy users. This, replace data center with big manufacturing plants. Right?
Could be anything.
It's the same challenge, right?
But I do think there is something unique about the AI piece. You're not wrong. Like it draws a certain anxiety. That it taps into this sort of larger fear I think people have about job loss and your career replacement, and what the future of work looks like. This is, we already have, I think, for many people, a negative impression of what AI means. But at the same time, we have an economic plan for this country that's very much driven by the notion that we need to embrace AI and we need to be on board with this. And so balancing those 2 things out is a difficult piece. Like, to me, this is also, among many things, this may turn out just to be a great NIMBY use case, right? Where everyone sort of agrees, well, we need data centers. I just don't want a data center near me. And I suspect we're going to get a little bit of that type of reaction as well.
Do we need data centers though? Because I think I can't help but think about what Bianca Wiley shared at our Tech Forward events in January, and she really challenged my feelings about it. Where no one asked for this technology. This wasn't satisfying a real demand in industry. This was presented to us, and it was an interesting enough technology that people started using it. But I don't know that it's solving a real need, and I don't necessarily know that we're seeing maybe we're starting to see a few of the productivity gains from this sort of technology, but it's not transformative in the ways that we sort of prognosticated. And I think the real challenge here is that there's a lot of investment going into this technology right now, and this is sort of the flavor of the day. AI is in everything, and AI is in every sort of job description now. But I wonder, is this the boon to our economy that we think it's going to be? And secondly, we talk about this urgency for AI infrastructure. And some people even conjure up images of the Cold War, and they say we're in an arms race with China. Is that a way to get around some of this regulation and some of the due diligence and consultation? There was some surveying done around the Mississauga data center as well, and specifically Hamilton. That's the one I was paying more attention to. And it seems like people really truly believe that we should be regulating AI, even if that slows down innovation and implementation.
Well, what's fascinating is some of the leaders of some of the largest AI companies in the U.S. earlier this week basically asked for that, and indicated that, and you've seen that there's been some high-profile examples in the last couple of weeks of even AIs that had been theoretically in locked boxes within organizations, like within Anthropic, and that escaped and had the ability to act and get into what was the word I'm looking for here? But basically,
infiltrates.
Thank you. Infiltrate was literally the word I was looking for. Like have an incursion onto another business and start interacting with their AI. They can't contain it, and they themselves know that there has to be some regulation. I think the challenge is that. How do you regulate? No one country's regulation can hold AI because it's the threat of what are other countries doing. It's much like regulations around sustainability, but in the reverse case, right? In this case, people don't want to be regulated because the fear is well, if we put regulations in here that slow down our ability to be competitive, but my competitors in Mexico or China or whomever aren't bound by the same regulations, they can produce things more cheaply. They can produce things more in a more cost-effective manner, and it becomes difficult for Canadian and North American businesses to compete. It's the same fear. I think the leaders within North America, when you got the leaders of some of the top AI companies saying we need regulation because we need to have some controls on this. But the fear is going to be if we limit what's happening here in North America, but we're not putting the same constraints on what's happening in Europe or China or Russia or whatever, then this fear we're being left behind. This characterization that it's an arms race is, I think, what's driving a lot of the irresponsible decision making around this, because the fear of being left behind is clouding out all the judgment around is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I'm a little bit skeptical when tech leaders are calling for regulation. I think it's often the case that regulation for thee and not for me, just because they were first movers. They are kind of exempt from their journey to where they're at was not riddled with regulation, but their competitors might have to.
Exactly.
And then the other piece of it too is around the arms race and China developing this technology. It's interesting because China can just turn off the taps to technology from the West, and we sort of try to do something similar with the NVIDIA chips and all of that, but we don't really do the same thing the other way around. And so there is this sort of globalization that we're contending with that I think maybe should be reconsidered or renegotiated. I'm not suggesting that we turn off the taps to anything in particular, but it's just we don't, like pharmaceuticals is a great example. There is a sandbox environment where you can develop and test your new pharmaceuticals, mRNA vaccines, whatever it is, and there are certain steps that have to be in place before you can bring it out to general public use. We don't think of tech in that same way. We think of everything as deploy. Everything is just straight to user, and I think that sort of shift in thinking is necessary. And there's an author named Karen Howe. Are you familiar with Karen?
I don't believe so, no.
She wrote a book called Empire of AI, and I'll send you a podcast about it. But she has really uncovered the ways in which there's really this cult around technology that protects it, inoculates it from the kind of of instinctive regulatory thinking that we apply to quite literally every other industry, but we just exempt it from AI because we think it's some sort of salvation type of industry.
That's interesting. And what in her opinion then drives that? Is it because I see this AI piece as it's being positioned not as a salvation technology, but almost like a salvation economic driver. That if for economies who are struggling to figure out how to move forward when manufacturing has left our shores, and what else can we do? It feels to me that AI is really being propped up as something that is a panacea economically, much more than it's a panacea in terms of changing people's lives or something like that, in the way that we would describe like a vaccine, for instance. Is what is her thinking behind, like, why do we remove these guardrails?
So admittedly, I do have to read her book, but in my view, what I would say is, I think part of it is a lot of this technology just came about at a time when you saw sort of the embrace of the free market in general. I think we have counterfactuals. China has nationalized much of this technology. Yes, they have private enterprise.
No, it's open source technology in China, because they want everyone to be able to utilize it and iterate on it.
Exactly.
It's actually a model that we should be emulating, I think, in many ways.
Yeah, but it's fundamentally the R&D that goes into that, and the sort of the gains and the all of sort of the innovation is largely facilitated by large state intervention. And we, like the U.S. has certainly done that. Mariana Mazzucato, I've referenced her a lot. The internet is a result of DARPA and all of this sort of big state intervention. That being said, the gains are still privatized, and so I think that thinking has just kind of accompanied the development of this technology, and so my view is if we can think about nationalizing some of this research and development and commercialization, I think we'd probably be in a better spot. That allows us to maybe not necessarily take our foot off of the gas,
right?
But it allows this development to be done in the public interest, as opposed to relying on the Sam Altmans and the Mark Zuckerbergs to be the progenitors of this technology.
Right. No, I definitely see the value in that approach. I think that the challenge, I think, at this point is it feels like if one were to agree with you, then the time to act is now. That feels like a very rapidly closing window, I guess is how I think about that.
Yeah.
Because you can make the argument, now I'm mixing up my metaphors, but like that train has already left the station a little bit.
You're right.
And how do you pull that back? What you're describing, I think, makes a lot of sense if we were talking 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's fair.
How do we make that happen now, when so much of it has already been commercialized, is in use, it's become so ubiquitous in the way that you're describing, in terms of how people utilize it on a day in, day out basis? I don't know how you give people a nerfed version now.
And not only that, it's not even that people are utilizing it. You can't escape it. It's you do a Google search, it's AI now, right? Like your phone is just AI. So you're absolutely right. What I would say is, I think I'm no expert on this. This is like, I've said this before, I'm a troglodyte when it comes to these sorts of things. But I think things like what's happening in Mississauga, where there's a year more. Again, we have to see the specifics of the bylaw, but just again, slowing down. I think slowing down is the answer.
I have no issue with that. The other piece that I don't think we're talking enough about here, and this to me is a real sort of Board of Trade point of view to have as well, is, so let's just assume for the purposes of this thought exercise that we agree that AI data centers are important and we need to have them, and our economy is going to be driven by them, all that good stuff.
Okay.
So let's do data centers, and let's assume that, I think that's the province put out something where they said, in the next 10 years, almost, I think it's like 12 or 13% of all electricity use in Ontario will be fueling data centers.
Wow.
So let's say, hypothetically, we can even address that challenge. So I'm not suggesting this is easy, but let's just say we're going to, two premises here. Data centers are important and we can meet the energy needs. We will figure that piece out. The third piece to me that is still pressing, and I don't understand how this piece gets solved without real thoughtfulness and to your point, slowing down and being considerate of what we want, is job creation. We at the end of the day, the argument for data centers is that they are engines that drive the overall economy in the way that you're describing. AI is embedded into every process, into every consumer good, into everything that we do. So we have to have the data centers in place to provide us with the computing power for those things to happen. But the reality is that in as much as they can be economic drivers, they're secondary economic drivers. They're behind the scene.
Yeah.
They're not actually job creators
No, they're not.
in and of themselves.
No, you're right.
These data centers, and we've been in some. I've been in a few. I know we've been in one together because one of our members is one. Amazing facility, and I think they're doing a lot of things. Particularly when you talk about the concerns people have around sustainability and water. I've seen a lot of good technology there, and referencing speakers we've had in the past. Joel McCharles, who we had at our Energy and Environment Forum, did a great job of laying out. The AI is a big user, but AI is also is the technology that will help us solve the problems as well. And he has a bit of a techno-optimist point of view, but he swayed me a little bit to say, look, these challenges aren't going to be solved without the help of AI either.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, the one problem I haven't figured out how we're going to solve is the creation of jobs. Yeah. And I understand downstream. I'm not one of these people who says AI won't create jobs in the future. I'm not fighting that piece. I'm saying purely on a Brampton economic development level, when we give up hundreds of thousands of square feet of commercial land to a data center, that may create a handful of jobs. Now, there's a lot of job numbers that come out when data centers are first being proposed, but most of those job numbers are construction jobs.
Yes,
it's building the data center.
Yeah.
And after 2 years, most of those jobs go away.
Yeah.
And then you've got a handful of people who are responsible for managing the data center. And some of those jobs are good quality jobs in engineering and high skill jobs. A lot of those jobs are maintenance and security type jobs. But nevertheless, it's not a large number relative to if that same land were turned over to even a logistics operator, let alone a manufacturer, let alone a number of smaller manufacturers, in some kind of commercial complex working on individual businesses. And when we have a limited amount of land left in the city that we can use for the development of industry, I do get concerned about things like data centers coming in that don't have a lot of job creation opportunity. They may be drivers of the economy and other jobs to be created. And on a national level, I can get behind that. But fundamentally, we're a municipal organization. I don't always see how it's beneficial. And I don't want to be a NIMBY guy, but I don't always see how it's beneficial to my community to have the data center when that land could be used for the creation of more jobs that would add more deeply to the tax base, that would create more opportunities for families to thrive in Brampton. That's my biggest concern right now that I don't think is being talked about enough.
No, you're right. It isn't. And I think that is something that, look, I grew up in the post-Cold War era, and like Francis Fukuyama's End of History, and there was at a time there was this belief that technology like this AI and blockchain technology, all this stuff, cutting edge, bleeding edge tech, that was the future, and that's also going to solve all these problems. And we can have profit and we can have sustainability and social justice and all these things, and I think over the course of the 2010s, you saw a real sort of rejection of these Bretton Woods era institutions and the sort of SDG, sort of thinking, UN thinking, right? And you realize that people started to be more critical of the Tony Starks and the Elon Musks of the world. And I think what you're describing here is why I so fundamentally reject this position, this belief that we are just a deindustrialized society and that manufacturing is a thing of the past. And we have a housing crisis and we need to build housing, and we need all these modular prefabricated homes. We need food security, a food strategy that can also produce jobs. We need to build out our public transport infrastructure. We need all of those, the wraparound supports for that and the transit-oriented developments and all of that. Like, these are all jobs. When we talk about these big investments, these are all jobs. And so I do think, between giving a large parcel of land to an AI data center versus building mixed-use residential or building, a manufacturing plant or something like that, I think the latter is a more useful investment because of the immediate job impact.
And that's where I kind of land on this piece too. So one of the things we'll have a lot of learning to do. Like I still want to connect with more deeply with our colleagues at the city. Talk to more of the folks who run these facilities and so forth. And quite frankly, it's probably worth some conversation. I have a meeting coming up in the next week with a number of leaders from across the GTA West boards of trades and chambers of commerce, all of us who've been looking at what's been happening in Mississauga, including the folks from Mississauga, to talk about this. And so I think we may revisit this with some more learnings. But I did want to touch on this, and I think where we're landing this conversation is kind of where I feel like I am in general right now, and that is there's a lot to be done to understand what the responsible deployment of these facilities looks like. I think slowing down and studying the problem and understanding the impacts is very, very important. Particularly as it pertains to the electricity, the power piece, to who's paying all that piece of it. But fundamentally, there's got to be a job creation angle. Is so important to me, particularly when we consider, again, not just what we're sacrificing in those lands, but especially if there's some version of this where we're not collecting the monies that are required to support the infrastructure, and therefore we as taxpayers are having to take on the cost of building the infrastructure for these data centers, but we're not creating jobs in our same community that is adding to that tax base. That's a terrible strategy.
Totally.
I'm not saying that's what the city of Brampton's doing.
No.
I just want to make sure that we're doing our part to ensure that we don't go down that road.
No, and Karen Howe also speaks about the externalities of data centers not being accurately estimated,
right?
And that also has a cost.
How could it be? I mean, there's such an emerging technology. This is my, in the same way that you're like, that your skepticism around, the deployment of these technologies. For me, it's always, my skepticism comes up when people talk about the certainty of the benefits or the risks, because they're just not known. And the more certainty and authority you speak with, the more I'm likely to be skeptical of what you're saying. It's just we're just too early in this for anyone really to understand economically, environmentally, health-wise, job creation-wise. I think it's right to be skeptical. I think it's right to be proceeding slowly, not to stop, but to proceed slowly. I think there's a sense of urgency that comes about when these technologies first take hold. I think it's fueled in many ways by the speculative nature of investment, where there's this sense, and I think in my opinion, it's really accelerated in the last probably 10 years with Bitcoin in particular. This sense that like if you're not on the train now, you're going to miss out in a big, big way. And I don't recall that ever really being a thing when it came to investment. There was always that like, oh my gosh, had I invested in Apple back in 1981, yada yada. There's those everyone has their miss thing where, but I think something happened in the last 10 years, and I think day trading in the early 2000s, but Bitcoin in particular, created this sort of general sense across the society that felt like you have to jump on a trend the moment of. You can be a millionaire overnight, or you'll regret it the rest of your life. And there's something that urgency, I think, when added to the way we're looking at technology now, that's created the sense of we can't pause, we can't stop and study. We have to move fast because. And we're going to miss on the opportunity. It's because China will lap us, because this will happen, because some other community will get this data center if we don't act quickly. And I think there's a lot more time available to us than we allow ourselves to believe that there is. And I think, I'm not suggesting a 1-year moratorium is right, but I don't know. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I just don't know. But I think, taking a pause and saying, let's develop a framework here. Let's have some conversations. Let's do some consultation. Let's learn before we deploy is not a bad idea at all.
No, exactly.
All right. All right. Well, we spoke a lot about something we didn't know anything about.
As we often do.
As we often do. Let's talk a little bit about Billy Bishop.
Let's do it.
That's been a topic we've talked about a couple times. There's been some developments. Why don't you talk about it? I've been doing a lot of talking.
I didn't think we would talk about Billy Bishop as often as we have, but there was some news that came out a few weeks ago now, and I
think part of it's because it's less a Billy Bishop issue. It's more about, it's becoming more a provincial issue, and an issue about priority. Like I think this is what this is morphing into. Why we're talking about Billy Bishop.
Exactly. And I'll say why I think the Billy Bishop issue just kind of frustrates me at times because there is a Brampton angle. But so a few weeks ago, the federal government announced that they were retreating from the Billy Bishop idea. They had some consultations in place for some time. There were some survey questions. It's funny, there were some people who were supportive of the Billy Bishop expansion project saying that the surveys were the questions were crafted in a manner that wasn't wasn't illustrative of all of the details and things
wasn't
like
an
that.
intellectually honest exercise, essentially.
It's hilarious because the opposite side said the same thing, but in the opposite direction. So they said the way that the questions were crafted was actually too supportive of the Billy Bishop Airport expansion. So it's kind of funny. But that consultation drew 87,000 respondents.
Yeah.
And overwhelmingly, I think it's upwards of 80% said absolutely not. They do not support expansion of Billy Bishop Airport for larger jets. So as a result, the federal government said that they will not be moving forward in support of this project. And that is effectively, for now, put this project in a sort of abeyance.
Yeah.
Because Bill, was it 110, I believe, is still law. And so the City of Toronto has been taken out of the tripartite agreement and replaced with the province. So what this has led to is some speculation that the province might be renegotiating its position on Alto and reconsidering, I should say, because a few MPPs have expressed some concern about this project. I won't get too much into that because that is still speculation. But what I would say is
the timing. The timing is, I think, would allow one to be a little bit more than just speculative on this particular issue.
And what I'll say about that is, Alto is I think that is a fundamentally different project than the Billy Bishop expansion because, number one, we don't have high speed in Canada, high speed rail. The Toronto to Montreal corridor is the most highly trafficked corridor in the country. So it would benefit greatly from a high speed project. And the consultation process is leaps and bounds
robust. It's
more
very
robust
yeah.
than what happened with Billy Bishop. There have been several, like we're very connected to Alto. They've done several consultative roundtables. They've invited us out. Communities that aren't technically on the proposed path, they've been very communicative with us. They've been very robust in their Indigenous consultation as well, to the point where there's some people who say, do away with all that consultation because it's red tape and getting in the way of progress. So they've gone out of their way to really strengthen their consultative practice. And they're still figuring things out, and so the route, by the way, isn't even defined just yet.
Yeah.
So I think it's a fundamentally different issue. I don't appreciate the comparison to Billy Bishop, but even then, I think just weighing the project out. What I will say is, because we have some friends who are supportive of the Billy Bishop expansion project. What I'll say is fundamentally, the reason why I'm so frustrated by this is that the process by which it was done is not a process I wish to repeat for anything. The City of Toronto was unilaterally removed from the tripartite agreement. Bill 110 contains within it provisions to essentially have the province assume ownership of and control over the areas that encompass the Toronto Island and a few other spots, little parks and such. That process, I think, actually circumvents all consultation. It cuts community out of the legislation entirely, or the process entirely. What I'll also say is the many of the folks who were supportive of the Billy Bishop expansion project have cited overcapacity at Pearson as a reason to support the Billy Bishop project,
which is fundamentally not true.
I don't know where that came from.
Yeah,
where and when did Pearson say that they are at capacity? They've invested many billions of dollars in the LIFT program, the long-term investment facilities and terminals.
That's correct.
Program, which sees the expansion of 2.2 million square meters of airspace.
Yeah, they're going to be, I think, in the next 10 years or to 12 years, passenger capacity. I want to say it's 65 million passengers, which is up from, I think they're at 35 now. Like, it is a huge undertaking that they're going through right now.
And it's a multi-billion-dollar project.
Yeah.
I don't know how it became fashionable to disparage our international airport and to suggest that it is somehow just overflowing with capacity at capacity when they are clearly investing in its future.
Yeah.
So I fundamentally think that there's no business case for the Billy Bishop Airport at all. And we've talked about improving regional connection to Pearson and expanding regional airports and that sort of thing. And I like Billy Bishop, but I don't necessarily know if there is a incremental benefit to expanding that airport when we have a multi-billion-dollar expansion at our international airport.
Yeah, and I hear that, and I'd love for you to expand on that a little bit,
Yeah.
because you've made your comments around the process and the
Yeah.
consultative process. Like, just to contrast Alto
Yeah.
to Billy Bishop, as a for instance,
Yeah.
the consultative process has been very different. I agree with you with everything with Alto. The
Yeah.
amount of engagement we've had with them,
Yes.
both directly through the Board of Trade or just in incidental ways, and how they've engaged with the community. And you're absolutely right. Among the criticisms of the project now
Yeah.
is that the consultation process has actually come to the point where it feels like it's just government slowdown
Yes.
and overstudy. In huge contrast to, we're just with a flick of a wrist gonna sign off on an airport expansion. But I think one of the points of contrast in my mind, I'm curious what your point of view is as well, if it matters or not, or how we even account for it, is the project. And to be clear, we're only equating the Billy Bishop and the Alto project because of this speculation that there's a little bit of a horse trading thing going on here now. That if the feds aren't going to give the province their airport, then the province isn't going to give the federal government support on their railway line.
Which is not confirmed or anything like that, but
I think it's a reasonable thing for us to speculate about. I don't think we're unfounded in our thinking here. In my mind, one of these projects, and it's not just because it's the purview of the federal government, it's the nature of the project itself. It's interprovincial. It affects multiple communities. If nothing else, Montreal and Toronto alone.
Yes.
Let alone all the places along the route, like places like Peterborough and so forth, that are going to have way more connectivity and have the opportunity as municipalities to start to grow and thrive, because there's going to be on a railway line that's going to have some real opportunity now for mobility of people between cities. That the Alto piece that's being proposed right now I think is generally accepted is the first step of a longer investment. We've already been, part of our support for the Alto line has always been with the provision that, what we want to see in there is expansion of that Alto line to Windsor, and we want to see an Ontario West segment put on as soon as possible, to really unlock the full potential of the province and really connect places like Brampton into the system.
Yeah.
Whereas the Billy Bishop piece, it feels very, very regional in its nature.
Yeah.
I understand it's going to really, make it easier for some folks who work and live in the downtown of Toronto to have a little more connectivity and perhaps not have to go through whatever inconvenience is perceived in having to go through Toronto Pearson. Let's assume that it is better to go through Billy Bishop. I've flown out of there. It's a lovely experience.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And when I worked in downtown Toronto and I had to get on a flight to go to a meeting, I flew out of Billy Bishop because it was more convenient to go there. But that little bit of convenience feels like is being weighed up against the opportunity to do something that has real national ramifications. To me, that's the argument. I agree with you. Everything you said about the consultative process.
Yes.
But even if the consultative process had been done correctly, on the province's level, on the province's approach to the airport in Toronto, I still would have pushed back, or at least wouldn't equate these two projects to one another.
Yeah.
One helps a small group of individuals in one city, the most important city in our country, but nonetheless a small group of people regionally. The other has, in its basic design, has connections between two of the most important cities in our country, and will unlock potential in so many communities along that route. No. They're not equivalent projects in any way.
No, absolutely. I think that's spot on. And what I would say is, on the opposite side, if it were the case that the federal government said, you know what, Alto is a national interest project, we're going to use our legislative powers to circumvent any and all consultation, and we're just going to push this project through, I would be criticizing that project too. But that isn't the case. And what is the case with Billy Bishop is the city, to this day, it has been removed from the tripartite agreement, that the province has essentially taken control and ownership over the lands in question. Yeah. And so from a process standpoint, it's problematic. But also, you're right. I think it benefits a narrow band of traveler, and we have an international airport that can service many different parts of the province if we improve some of the regional transportation options. And they've invested multi-billions of dollars in expanding their capacity. So this argument that Pearson's just over capacity is that's wrong too. So again, I'm finding vanishingly few reasons for a business case for Billy Bishop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I and what's interesting, and we often, when it comes to issues that are broader in nature, across the province or across the country, we participate in organizations like the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and we're part of their membership and the Canadian Chamber. And oftentimes we find ourselves in agreement. When we come to resolutions that these organizations are putting forward, whether it be these larger bodies or with our working with our regional partners like the Mississauga Board of Trade or the Toronto Chamber of Commerce or so forth, we often find ourselves very much on a similar page. And if there's any debate or fine-tuning of messaging, it's to make sure a specific regional point of view may be taken into account.
Yes.
Make sure we're putting in this little extra line to cover off something that's happening in Brampton relative to, or whatever the case may be. I find this one's a really interesting one because this has really engendered some different points of view across chambers regionally, how Toronto sees it versus how Brampton sees it and others. It's really been a point of difference. And it really feels like, to me, this is a regional issue in many ways, because if it were seen as having, I think, a broader, to me, that's an indication of the very regional and almost parochial nature of this issue. If it really had the potential to have impact on a provincial level or on a federal level, I think you'd see a lot more boards and chambers all in unison. I think our support would be much more robust.
Yeah.
But we have this skepticism toward it because we just don't see the value.
Yeah.
But those boards who do are the ones who are most directly impacted because of geography.
Exactly.
And it feels like it just, to me, reinforces that this feels like and I'm not saying the folks in those boards and chambers are wrong to advocate for it. We all have to advocate for what's best for our community.
Yeah.
But let's call it what it is there for. It's good for your community. I don't see it as being good for the whole. Whereas the Alto project, to me, feels like one that's good for everybody.
It's sort of the inverse of the data center thing. Right?
That's right. Yeah, in many ways. In many ways.
Cool. Okay.
All right. So let's see. This might be the last time we talk about Billy Bishop. We'll see how this plays out. But I'm curious. If this does, I would be very unfortunate if because of the speculation that we have, and I think it's a generally accepted point of view, that these two things are being linked together because of the Fed's lack of support for Billy Bishop, that this slows down anything with Alto. I would hate to see that happen because that's a project that is a multi-decade project. We can't afford to slow it down. It's not like we can make up that time quickly and easily.
Exactly.
The last thing you wanted to talk about today was the funding announcement regarding housing.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So yesterday, the federal government announced in Toronto $2.7 billion towards supporting new housing projects, 18 projects, I think resulting in 5,600 rental units.
Yeah.
An incredible investment in housing, and specifically a really good move by Build Canada Homes, which I know many of us have been speculating about, wondering, what is sort of the specific mandate there.
I think we've been critical of it.
Yeah,
fair
enough. And much of those projects are non-market or below market.
Yeah,
and
that's the part that I was excited by.
Yes.
Yeah, not the number of units, but the fact that there was a focus on non-market housing.
Yeah. And even the portion that is sort of market or given to private developers. There is a mandate for affordable units within those as well. So it's a good mix. It's a good smattering of different project types, and I think it's a very encouraging announcement. There are many nonprofit organizations that are benefiting. One of which is the Parkdale Land Trust, and I know we've talked about Community Land Trust before. So that's really encouraging to see, and I think I'm interested in it. Partly because there's potential for Brampton, and we are working on a workforce housing white paper.
Yeah.
And we have an event coming up at the end of September, the Brampton Economic Summit, and we will be talking about the need for specific kinds of housing types in Brampton that we historically have not had. And this might be an indication that there's some political will and interest to supporting that sort of investment in a community like Brampton. So,
and that was the part that thrilled me, was seeing that focus. Again, it was very light. The announcement didn't give a lot of detail, to be clear. So we can't draw a lot of conclusions. But the fact that the announcement did include different models of housing, modalities of housing, showed for the first time I can think of, where the federal government was really acknowledging that there had to be some flexibility in thought.
Yeah.
and an approach to how we're going to address this housing crisis.
Yes.
And I think what it creates, therefore, I would hope, is the opportunity for communities like ours then to bring forward more bold ideas about what that solution can look like.
Totally.
I think of downtown Brampton as a for instance, and we talk a lot about how we can revitalize the downtown through commercial development, and thankfully some of that good stuff is starting to happen now that we've had some of the the Riverwalk project and the flood mitigation is removing some of the barriers that had paused that development. But nonetheless, we sit on a lot of underutilized commercial property in the downtown of Brampton right now. And I know the city is taking some steps to catalog that and coming up with some approaches perhaps that will incentivize or make it easier for businesses to take up space in downtown Brampton.
Which is very encouraging,
But we also see in places like Chicago, for instance, and they have a different infrastructure, they have a lot more buildings to work with, but they're converting some of these underutilized commercial spaces and office towers into affordable housing for individuals. They're turning it into homes, condominiums. And I think that's one, or rental properties, not condos, but rental properties, which I think is amazing. And I think, that's the type of thinking that gets unlocked when the federal government starts to acknowledge that we have to be more flexible in our thinking about what we're willing to support. What it hopefully will do is empower communities to think more boldly as well. So I'm really excited by this announcement because I hope, I'm not saying that what I cited is the solution, but I think you can really start thinking outside the box when the ultimate funder of that project says we are acknowledging that we have to start thinking differently. It's not just about some incentives for developers to maybe come up with a few more affordable units within a housing, but we're not changing anything fundamentally. But if we're saying we're willing to subsidize models of home ownership or rentals that are outside the box, then I think it gives us the opportunity to start thinking more dramatically about what we can do.
Totally.
At least that's what I hope.
Yeah, no, that's my feeling. I think this is a good news story. And yeah, very, very, very keen to see what gets replicated in communities, not just like Brampton, but that are not major urban centers, because the types of housing challenges we face are acute and they are different than that of Toronto. Just to give some insight into what we're talking about in the report, it's no secret, Brampton has a lot of single family homes. And there are a lot of large households, especially in the eastern part of Brampton, the Castlemore area. 5-6 people in a home, and so there is this demand for potentially co-living arrangements. There is demand for these 2+ bedroom rental in not just in the downtown, but in areas like Bramalea and so on and so forth that are a little bit more dense than areas like the western part of Brampton or the eastern part of Brampton. And so there is a different kind of innovation that I think can come out of a place like Brampton. And so, I'm optimistic.
To your understanding, and I again, there wasn't a lot of detail in what was announced yesterday, so I'm more just tapping into your knowledge on the subject more broadly, because you and Fadil have been working on this white paper. Is how much of these funds, if any, are applicable toward the infrastructure around the development of these homes? Well, like when I think about these sort of modes of of living that we're talking about changing, like making bylaw adjustments or zoning changes that would allow for existing houses to be turned into duplexes, for instance, could be an easy solution without a lot of new build. But then I think about like neighborhoods like the one that I live in, where there's a significant number of people who have basement apartments, many of which I suspect are not registered basement apartments. And I see the challenges that has. It doesn't bother me that people live in those homes, but where I get inconvenienced at times or get frustrated at times is that there's not sufficient driveway space. There's not sufficient parking on my. There's not sufficient width in the streets to accommodate driving easily when so many people are forced to park on the street, therefore. And some of those things are surmountable. Everything is fixable with money, quite frankly. My curiosity is that when we see these types of funding announcements through initiatives like Build Canada Homes, my impression is that those dollars are largely focused on new development, and they're largely focused on the home infrastructure itself, like the building itself and the envelope of the building. I seldom see, or to my understanding, dollars or resources that are being put toward the understanding that existing neighborhoods may need to be reconfigured, or other resources may need to be put into existing neighborhoods to facilitate some of the changes we need to accommodate intensification. Am I correct in that, or do you see it differently?
No, you're absolutely correct. My understanding is that these are capital dollars that are directed to the builders themselves,
Yeah.
developers essentially. To what extent does that money eventually flow to the municipality through development charges? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
This is ultimately why people say, could it be a developer bailout, right?
Yeah.
As we saw in
Vancouver,
in British Columbia. Yeah. So that's interesting. The other piece is there is a program already, the federal and provincial agreement around the development charge reduction program.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that funding goes directly to the municipality,
right,
to support all of the wraparound infrastructure that's needed.
But that's still on net new builds,
yes,
correct?
Yeah.
Because and I only bring it up because I got excited by what you shared, right? Like I'm not pushing back on any of those things being good initiatives, but you did touch on something that, when we talk about the broader landscape of housing, and I don't want to get ahead of anything that's going to be in the paper.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it in more detail when we get there. But part of the solutioning is how can we repurpose or reimagine the properties that we already have, right? Yeah. Can we turn normal houses into duplexes? Can we find ways to better regulate and therefore encourage responsible and safe basement apartments, for instance, or secondary residences on one's property, secondary structures on one property? It doesn't always have to be a net new. There are things we can do.
Yes.
But I struggle to figure out, and in some cases, those are easier because those are just regulatory changes. They don't require money. You can actually let the homeowner
exactly.
Make that investment decision on their own.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really even cost the taxpayer anything to let that happen. Maybe some incidental bylaw enforcement needs to occur.
Yeah, you're right.
Maybe a few more folks working on the committee of adjustment. But fundamentally, if I make the decision because I'm allowed to do something in my home, that's on me.
Yeah.
So a lot of that solutioning is low cost, but there is a downstream impact in terms of the surrounding infrastructure. And there's no DC collection that goes into my 40-year-old neighborhood and says, okay, we can now widen the roads to allow for people to better park or create, in that little crescent there where there's a little green space in the middle, turn that into a parking lot that people in that neighborhood can make use of so that they can have more cars on that street.
Yeah, or get rid of or change, I should say, minimum parking requirements, so that you can embrace the reality that more and more people are getting around the city without a car, and you can retrofit your existing lot to have some additional rental. I think that's a really interesting policy idea, and I'd be keen to see what the federal government thinks of that, and the provincial government for that matter. But no, it's interesting. I think this idea of as of right zoning that allows for some missing middle, gentle density. I think there's been a lot of interest in that. I don't know that there's been a lot of movement towards that just yet. So that's another thing that we are discussing in the paper as well.
I'm really excited. I've read some draft stuff, but I've actually been purposefully sticking away from it a little bit because I know you and Fadil are kind of in the depths of it right now. Yeah. So I'm kind of waiting now because I know the cake is almost at the point where I get to see the whole thing. So I'm quite excited to see where this goes.
Cool. Yeah.
Very cool. So maybe that's, I think those are the things we want to talk about today.
Sure.
But as always, we wanted to, we try to cover a little bit of time to talk about, whatever is interesting us in the culture at large, reading, listening to, whatever they have you.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about? What's on your mind?
Well, I'm a big Spider-Man fan, and
it was awesome.
Yeah. I'm careful not to share spoilers or anything, but what I will say is,
how about we do this? Spoiler alert! If you haven't seen Spider-Man, then we'll talk to you at the next podcast.
There you go.
And if you have seen Spider-Man, then hang out with us for another 5 minutes.
So I have a feeling we're both going to talk about Spider-Man. So what I'll talk about is a couple things. Number one, if you stay for the credits, there is, spoiler warning, there is a beautiful montage of shots from New York City.
Yeah.
Which I think, number one, it indicates that Daniel Destin Cretton and the folks who worked on this film, Destin Daniel Cretton rather, they understand that New York is a character in Spider-Man lore. So that's really good. It's also inspired a lot. I don't know if you've seen these edits. Inspired a lot of folks to make their own versions in their own cities. Which is very beautiful. And from a city building standpoint, you love to see it. But also they were, I think that was one of the longest credit sequences that I've seen. And they really went out of their way to credit everyone who worked on the film. Yeah. And in particular, if you stayed for the end credit scene, just before the post credit scene, you saw a Quebec logo, an Ontario logo.
Yeah.
And
that's a lot of post-production stuff that happens here. But yeah, there is work there's job creation in Canada every time one of these Marvel movies gets made.
And again, to our earlier discussion around job creation, like movies are great job creators. A lot of people are required to make movies.
Yeah.
And that was just a reminder of that, I think. And I love that we do have, especially Quebec. Quebec's sort of the star in all of this, but we have policies that really facilitate arts and culture in our country. So that's been really great. There are some themes in the film as well around the acceptance of AI and technology. To our earlier conversation, that I think is interesting. That's been some discourse. There's been some discourse there. They call it propaganda.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how some of these films, especially I referenced Tony Stark earlier, and Tony Stark kind of is this composite character, I think, of the 2010s, where our futures and our sort of salvation sort of lay with these brilliant minds, and most of them men.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think there is now a reaction to this film, like generally positive, but there is this sort of techno-skepticism around superheroes and also the complicity with law enforcement and all of that I think is very interesting. And I think it's a sign of the times. I think if that film was made, even 5 years ago, I don't know that you get the same reaction and the same sort of skepticism.
How so? I'm not saying you're wrong. I just want to make sure I understand it so I can add to this conversation.
Yeah, it's so specifically around the use of AI and surveillance.
Right.
So there's a scene in the film.
I know the scene you're talking about. Yeah.
And a lot of people have been comparing that to 2008's The Dark Knight,
right,
where Bruce Wayne has the same sort of thing, where he's kind of mass surveillance on everybody.
And destroys it at the end.
It destroys it at the end, and Morgan Freeman's like, I would want no part of this, but it's sort of very casually, very cavalier, in a cavalier fashion, sort of deals with mass surveillance. And so people have raised that as like, oh, is this normalizing mass surveillance? And I think that's interesting. Firstly, I think the MCU is just that. That is just what it is. But it also is indicative to me that there are changing attitudes towards mass surveillance.
I think that's interesting. And I haven't had too many conversations around that specific piece. But I see the point of view, and it's come up in other Marvel movies too, because that notion of being traceable and being seen is something that sort of pervades through many of the Marvel movies, particularly the more street level ones. That's always a tool that the heroes have available to them.
Yes.
And it has very much normalized it. But I don't know that I don't know that I would engage in that as a criticism so much as just a reflection of where we are.
Exactly.
Because I don't think I would be more concerned about it if it felt as though that were some dystopian future that were being portrayed and trying to normalize this idea. The reality is that we've been in that world for like 10 years already anyway.
100%.
I don't believe there's anything I could do that wouldn't be traceable back. And I'm not saying I'm not applying a value judgment. I don't think that's a positive thing, but I am saying it is a thing. I utilize a cell phone. I walk around on public streets. There are cameras everywhere. Every device I have has some kind of chip in it at this point that's traceable. My car, what have you. I'm not endorsing it. I just don't know that that's something to draw attention to. I think it's just we've accepted that as a society now, and I don't know how. That's one of those genies. I don't know how you put that back in the bottle.
No, exactly.
There's a great comic. Oh my gosh. Oh, it's driving me crazy. I will find it and I will send it to you. But it's this, and it's going to come to me in 2 minutes because these things always do. There's a fantastic comic, came out as a web comic initially, and then they put it into a print version. And the whole idea of it is basically living in a near future, essentially now, the only thing that has any value is your privacy. That it is the only commodity that has anything because everything else has been given away. And so what happens when you live in a world where the only thing that you can control and the only thing, therefore, that has currency is privacy and with being able to control who gets to see your identity. And it has all these really interesting sort of spill-on effects as to what that looks like. Everything from the mundane to like how people manage that, to the masks that people wear in public, to the very specific of like what it is to transact and to whom do you, therefore, give the power of getting to know who you actually are and your habits, your points of view, and all this sort of stuff. I'll send it to you. It's a fantastic comic.
Wow.
And when it comes back to me, we'll put it in the show notes or whatever, because it's worth reading.
That feels very much like what we're in right now.
Yeah. No, it very much so does. It very much so does. But the Spidey movie, there's so much about it I like. There's the ongoing Marvel world building.
Yes.
I love the notion of how they've clearly created this as a central node for everything else that's happening. I think there was a lot of thought in my mind put into, because it's a little bit of a cameo fest, but I think the cameos were very thoughtful in many ways.
Yeah, intentional. Yeah,
I think having characters like the Punisher and Damage Control in there anchors this movie into the Marvel TV universe. That it connects the Daredevil, all the stuff that's happening on Disney Plus, into this new Marvel universe. Bringing in Elena, anchors it into that Avengers world. And same thing with Bruce Banner, and then bringing in Jean Grey links it to whatever's to come. But it's really established that the central point of what's happening. To use the Tony Stark analogy, Tony Stark is gone. Peter Parker is now the new Tony Stark. And the Marvel universe will flow through him and whatever happens to Spider-Man. Which is kind of how the real Marvel comic universe works.
Totally.
Which I like that piece of it.
And I'm surprised by that decision, because it is a Sony property at the end of the day, right? And so I was quite shocked that they included it. It felt like an X-Men movie as well, to some degree. And the fact that the first time we see an in-universe X-Men, or like mutants, that it will eventually become one of the first
foundational
X-Men,
mutants,
it was in a Spider-Man film, and I thought that was absolutely, that was intriguing.
No, I'm excited by that, and then sort of those larger themes. I thought were interesting. One of the things I actually really liked. It's funny you talk about the Tony Stark of it all. What I glommed onto was how they're positioning Peter as the heir, but also the anti-Tony Stark. In that, one of the things I've always liked about Peter Parker is that he is a genius on the level of Henry Pym and Tony Stark and Reed Richards and Bruce Banner. But what holds Peter back all the time is his own insecurity. That he is a genius on those levels. That he is capable of solving problems with science. But the combination of his guilt, his bad self-esteem, the fact that he's younger than everyone else, sort of holds him back in this weird way. And in the passing of Tony Stark, they show all the ways in which Peter sort of steps up as the genius. He develops all the tech that he needs. He's able to create his own suits. He does whatever 3D printing he's doing. He's got all this technology figured out. He can have a conversation with Bruce Banner and all the things. But so he is a genius on that same level. But whereas Tony Stark, to use the Elon Musk of it all, is all about the technology for technology's sake. He's a weapons dealer who grows a conscience over the course of his life. Peter's superpower is actually his humanity. That he's the one character that, because again, I thought it was really interesting the characters they brought into this movie, the Cameo Fest. It wasn't just, again, this is where I thought was thoughtful. I think the characters that they brought in were to tie the various Marvel universes together. But they also specifically picked the Black Widow, the Punisher, and the version of Jean Grey, Bruce Banner. All those are all the loner outcast characters of their respective universes. And if you watch their respective individual properties, all of which deal with depression, PTSD, ostracization, these are all super vulnerable characters.
Totally.
And what do they all do? They all find companionship, and they all find hope in Peter Parker. That his genius isn't being able to create stuff. His genius is being able to use technology, but connect on a human level. The Punisher being the best example of that. Someone who is a sociopath and has no friends, has, if you watch the Disney Plus version of him, he's just a killing machine. And what is he? He's making chili. He's making jokes. His big, the guy who kills wantonly is torn up because he thinks he might have hurt Spider-Man. Right. And this idea that he has this genius level intellect, but that his real power is being able to break through to people and connect with them. I thought that was such a powerful idea in that movie that I really liked. That this is the new Marvel universe we're creating now. We have a Tony Stark that actually has a heart, not a Tony Stark who discovered a conscience. And I think this is a really interesting idea for what comes next as they continue to build out that universe. I like that idea a lot.
That's a really good encapsulation of the reasons why I feel that they've understood this character so profoundly well. And I love that that they weren't on the nose with it either. Like we made the connection of Punisher serving this part of Spider-Man and Peter Parker's current mental state, and Bruce Banner is now this like monster that's growing inside of him, and he was the Einstein to Spider-Man's Oppenheimer as well, and Yelena, Thunderbolts also dealt with a lot of these themes, and she was like, I'm just happy to see you have friends. Like,
she the most depressed character in the Thunderbolts, and she's happy for him.
Yes,
she's worried about him.
Exactly. And I love that Peter never introduces himself as Peter Parker until the end. And that I thought was like really special, because that to me, that's the arc. He's like, you know what, Peter Parker died back in 5 years ago, whatever it is. And I'm just Spider-Man, and so I'm going to use these aliases and whatnot. And then at the end, he reintroduces himself to his best friend as Peter. And it's representative of this embrace of who he is, and the fact that
the balance.
And I think that was quite beautiful as well. And I think visually, like it's the best looking Spider-Man film in a long time.
Oh, it's great. I mean, and the change in director was a big part of that. The other thing I was thinking too, and I don't know if you're having this experience yet. I'm definitely having this experience now. Is I'm old enough that the directors that are coming up now are being influenced by movies that I've seen in my lifetime. So when I, like the movies I watched growing up, when I watched a Scorsese movie or a Spielberg movie or a Lucas movie, I got it, but I had to go do the work to understand, oh, okay, so George Lucas is really just like, aping Kurosawa here. But it's not like I knew what Kurosawa was. I had to go and do the homework and go find movies that occurred before my lifetime to understand the influences of the directors of their time. But now I'm old enough that I'm actually able to see, oh, this guy or he or she, oh, they're influenced by this. And so when you talk about the visual of the movie, to me, that movie was The Matrix. Everything from the Peter reconciling I am the one, the way the action sequences, especially with the hand, the way they shot martial arts.
That hand scene is Neo dodging the bullets.
Like so much of that movie visually was taken from The Matrix, and I don't mean in a way that's bad. That movie, The Matrix, is like a 30-year-old movie. It's not like I'm accusing someone of ripping something off. It's like, I'm old enough now that I can see the influences of these young directors are movies that came up in my lifetime. And I really like that little bit of it. Visually it was amazing, but I saw other movies that I've seen in there, and to me it was borrowing heavily from the visual language of The Matrix.
100%.
And which made me super happy, by the way. I love that.
It's really cool. I think what I love about comic book films is that people talk about superhero fatigue, but I do feel like Spider-Man is the Odyssey, just for right now, right? Like this is mythology that can be repurposed to make a comment on today, right? And that's what Nolan did with the Odyssey. The people who were up in arms about Emily Wilson's translation and all of that, to me, I feel like, yes, I understand Nolan specifically referencing Emily Wilson because he wanted to capture this feminist angle to his film. I understand why that would make you upset. That being said, I think if you wanted a one-to-one recreation of the translation, then you don't understand film as a medium. I feel the same way about Spider-Man. It doesn't. I'm not too pressed about whether or not there's a Norman Osborn in this universe and Dr. Octavius and all of that. What I appreciate much more is the idea that Spider-Man can still feel relevant to a young person today. Right?
No, I totally hear that, and I think if you're going to go down that sort of road of analogy, I think there's a whole bunch of other stuff you can pull from there too. When we talk about the Odyssey, for instance, you're talking about one translation of an epic poem. It's not the only translation, and that's where some of the controversy comes from. It's a point of view. But I'm a comic book reader long before I was an MCU fan. I continue to be a comic book reader and collector, and to me, this was always built into the comic book ethos, and I always had trouble anytime usually some bro-y guy would talk about how the movie didn't get something right or this wasn't the right representation. And surely there are certain tropes that have to be maintained. The purity of Captain America's heart, the insecurity of Peter Parker, the conflict of Bruce Banner. Like there are certain things that are so fundamental to the character.
Yeah.
But outside of that, every character is there to be reimagined. And if you're a comic book fan, not an MCU fan only, you know that because you talked about the credit scene. I don't know if you pay attention but at that part, but there was the list of, we want to thank. Yeah. And it was a run of creators starting with Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, right up to the most modern writers who are working on Spider-Man. And every time someone gets a hold of getting to write Spider-Man, they put their twist on it.
Yes,
Brian Michael Bendis' Spider-Man is where Miles Morales and all the modernization came from. Steve Ditko is the visual language of what Spider-Man was. He's the original artist.
The suit was very John Romita Sr.
Exactly. So everyone puts their imprint. Everyone gets to tell their story. And the way comics work is your hero goes through whatever journey you've got over the number of issues that you're allowed to write for them. And in the end, the joke in comic books is that, every now and then you get this issue. It's like, and this is the one where everything changes. It'll never go back again. Yeah. But the joke is it always goes back again because it's always a reset to the original version of that character, more or less.
Yes.
So that the next writer gets to pick up the character and do what they want to do with Spider-Man or Thor or Batman or whatever. Nothing happens in comics that is ever permanent. That's why every character eventually comes back who dies, is because the writer wants to be able to play with all those toys again.
Yes.
And so this idea that there's some sacrosanct version of these characters, only one way to tell the story, never sits right with me when it comes to comic book stuff. And so when it came up in the Odyssey conversation, to me, I immediately went to how I think about comic books.
Yeah.
These are stories that are meant to allow us to illustrate points of view, to draw analogies to what's happening in our lifetime, and therefore to make them relevant to the moment. They have to have some flexibility, whether that be in the racialization of the characters, what parts of the story you emphasize to draw the analogy to what's happening in politics today, or simply updating the technology to make them relevant in the context of the storytelling, to match with the character's origin.
Yeah,
you just have to do it. It's like how the Punisher went from Vietnam to now being a veteran of the conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah,
right. You have to allow these characters to morph, and if you want to resist that, I think you're kind of missing the whole point of what these stories are about.
Totally. Yeah. I love that.
2 last questions, and then we'll wrap up this because I'm really fascinated by this.
Okay.
1, how choked up did you get at when you realized the handshake?
Oh my gosh.
I completely lost it.
Crazy.
I completely lost it.
Yeah. That was so perfect, by the way. And the one of the reasons I love that is they didn't sideline Ned, which I thought that they were going to do in this film. But he represents something that's really important. I love the scene where they're playing with the Star Wars.
I got choked up there.
Yeah,
that was. I think it was the first time I cried. But when they did the handshake at the end, I totally lost it. I totally lost it.
That was wild. That was wild. I love that. Then your second question.
And the second scene, the post credit scene at the very end.
Yes. The
little spider in space.
Yeah.
I think there's like four prevailing theories.
Yeah.
Maybe 3 at least. It's Spidey Battle World.
Yeah. Which is what I thought. I thought it was Secret Wars. Yeah.
Venom.
Yeah.
Because we know Venom's in this universe now too.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Or it's Miles Morales.
Yeah.
Which theory do you subscribe to?
The Miles Morales one is interesting because that's, I think, the next Spider-Man movie to come out is the Beyond the Spider-Verse. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
I assumed it was Battle World. It was Secret Wars. Yeah, and I thought that was the coolest thing.
I thought it was Battle World too, but one of my kids said Miles Morales. I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, could be. I've also heard Tobey Maguire. Like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. One of the other spiders coming back. Another a multiverse spider.
Yeah. And not to spoil, but like maybe a doomsday sort of thing.
Well, I think it all is leading to something happening in December. I'm just trying to figure out which of those 4 things it is.
Yes.
But I just and who knows? We'll find out in time.
Yeah.
But that was my speculation. I was like, I immediately went to Battle World. I think this is a Secret Wars reference because of the space thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea that it's another spider character from another universe, particularly being Venom or Miles Morales. But you saw the reference to Miles Morales in the poster.
Yes.
I assume,
yes. Totally.
Right.
Oh my
so
gosh,
they're definitely signaling Miles Morales is coming.
Yes. Yes, for sure. And the other scene that I got a little choked up with is when Aunt May is saying specifically, like that whole scene was great, but specifically this idea that you don't have to do this alone. That's your responsibility. Yeah. I thought that was an incredible flip on with great power comes great responsibility. This idea that like we've always assumed it's self-sacrificial. Yeah. It's about like, you have to sideline your life in order to pursue this greater goal. And with that scene, it's like, you have a responsibility to yourself.
Yeah.
Like that's what comes with great power as well. And I thought like that's what you do with Spider-Man. You interrogate the character and you make it relevant.
Yeah. No, it was that whole scene actually of how he lets Jean into his mind, not to have a conversation with him, but to be able to access his memories of Aunt May and have that conversation and give her the opportunity to get the mentoring that he had. That was super powerful. I'm getting choked up now. It was super powerful. There were so many great little moments in that. It was a lot. Like it was a bit of a smorgasbord.
Yeah.
They almost did too many things, but the moments that stood out, I thought were really, really excellent.
Really
all the
good.
character moments were really, really good.
So good.
Yeah. All right. If you stayed this long, thank you. That was a long conversation about Spider-Man. But we appreciate it. And we'll be back again in a couple weeks to have some more conversations with y'all. All right. Talk to you soon.
Take care.